For many animals, spreading fire triggers the sensible response: get away. Humans saw the same glowing hazard and invented the campfire chair. We are the ape that can be killed by flame and still pays money for a better view. That is a bizarre evolutionary outcome. Fire can destroy tissue, fill your lungs with smoke, erase a shelter, and turn a pleasant evening into paperwork with the fire department. Yet give us a controlled flame, and we become strangely still. We gather around bonfires on warm nights and install fireplaces in houses already warm. When actual fire becomes inconvenient, we stream burning logs onto electric televisions. The hairless ape built the semiconductor so it could watch digital wood burn. The obvious explanation is that fire feels good because fire was good for us. Warmth, light, cooked food, protection. That story is probably part of the truth, but there is another possibility. What if our fascination with fire is not a reward for having mastered it, but a drive that once helped make mastery possible? Children make this puzzle harder. Many of them do not merely enjoy a flame from a tasteful distance. They want to inspect it, feed it, move the stick, drop something in, watch what catches, what smokes, what flares, what collapses into glowing red fragments. To a modern parent, this is filed under the technical category of absolutely not. Sensibly so. But from an evolutionary perspective, curiosity toward something dangerous is expensive. Curiosity toward mud is messy. Curiosity toward fire can redesign your eyebrows. So perhaps the brain is not running a simple command that says, fire equals nice. And it cannot be running fire equals run either. For most animals, fleeing an uncontrolled blaze is a good policy. For our ancestors, avoiding fire completely could also be costly. A creature that never learned how flame behaved would give up heat, light, cooked food, protection, and eventually, a vast family of technologies built on controlled heat. The useful rule would have to be more complicated. Do not ignore this thing. Learn it. That is close to a hypothesis proposed by evolutionary anthropologist Daniel Fessler. The claim is not that scientists have found a fire gene, a fire-loving neuron, or a tiny caveman app hiding behind your frontal lobe. They have not. The idea is subtler. Humans may possess evolved, domain-specific learning mechanisms, or attentional biases, that make fire unusually salient during childhood, encouraging us to acquire locally useful knowledge about how it behaves. The mechanism is hypothetical. The pattern behind the hypothesis, however, is fascinating. Think of it as an installer rather than an instruction manual. Evolution cannot simply preload, use this exact wood, stack 3 pieces at this angle, blow for this many seconds. Fuel differs. Weather differs. Humidity differs. Techniques differ. A rigid script that works in one environment may be useless in another. But evolution could, in principle, install a priority flag. When you encounter fire, allocate attention. Watch other people. Experiment carefully. Build the database from the local environment. In machine learning language, the ancestral problem looks less like a lookup table and more like reinforcement learning. Too close. Penalty. Let the flame die. Penalty. Fill the shelter with smoke. Penalty. Set the shelter on fire. Extremely memorable penalty. Keep the right fuel burning at the right intensity. Enormous reward. The system has to sample the world. What burns? What only smolders? What makes sparks? What makes smoke? What happens when the wind changes? And these are not trivia questions. A green branch may hiss instead of burn. Dry grass can vanish in a flash. Resin can spit sparks. A dead-looking ember can stay hot. Fire is a moving system whose rules change with material, weather, and context. A child cannot inherit a perfect lookup table for all of that. The useful inheritance, if one exists, would be a reason to keep watching. Evolution does not need to preload the answer. It only needs to make the question difficult to ignore. But if that is more than a neat metaphor, the past should look like a world in which sustained attention to fire had enormous practical value. It does. At Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, evidence published in 2026 confirmed repeated burning in Acheulean strata 10 and 11. Stratum 10 dates to around 1 million years ago, while the older stratum 11 is constrained to roughly 1.79 to 1.07 million years ago. The traces occur at least about 30 meters inside the ancient cave entrance, where ordinary wildfire is a poor explanation. Researchers also identified heated small animal bones using 2 independent methods: including luminescence and FTIR spectroscopy. The important point is what this does not prove. It does not prove that those hominins could create fire whenever they wanted. The evidence is compatible with obtaining natural fire, carrying it, and maintaining it. And there is no cooking evidence in those particular layers. That difference matters enormously. Imagine you have fire, but no matches, no lighter, and perhaps no reliable way to make a new flame. If this one goes out, you may not know when the next lightning strike, brush fire, or other source will give you another chance. Suddenly the fire in front of you is not ambience, it is infrastructure. It is a battery at 1%, except the battery keeps trying to eat your house. You watch it because you have to. You learn when to add fuel, how much, which material, where to place it, how to transport embers, how to keep it alive without letting it become the dominant member of the household. Before fire was something humans could summon, it may have been something humans had to keep alive. By around 790,000 years ago, the evidence from Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel begins to look more like organized control. Researchers found burned seeds, wood, and flint, with small burned flint fragments distributed in non-random concentrations. The interesting story is not merely ancient humans had fire, it is that fire increasingly looks like an object being managed in particular places. An environmental event is becoming a technology. Now jump forward again, to Barnham in Suffolk, England. A recent nature study presented evidence around 400,000 years old for deliberate fire-making, heated sediment, a heat-fractured hand axe, and 2 pieces of iron pyrite, a mineral that can generate sparks when struck with flint. Pyrite is rare locally, which strengthens the case that it was deliberately brought there. The researchers frame the history of fire as a long progression from collecting natural fire, to maintaining it, to eventually producing it deliberately. We need to be careful here. Archaeology gives us the earliest evidence we have found, not the exact first moment something happened. We cannot say humans spent 1,000,000 years unable to make fire, but the gap between very ancient fire use and much later strong evidence for deliberate ignition still shows something important. Using fire and making fire are not necessarily the same technological level. One useful way to picture that technological problem, not as a literal archaeological sequence, but as a skill tree, is this. Humans may have learned to use fire long before they learned how to summon it, and that distinction changes what technology means. If fire must be collected from nature and kept alive, every ember becomes stored opportunity. Someone has to remember which fuel lasts through the night, how to transport a coal, shelter it from rain, and recognize usable heat under dead-looking ash. Knowledge is not an optional extra. Knowledge is part of the technology. If that picture is even approximately right, attention to flame was not prehistoric entertainment. It was maintenance. A child who closely watched adults handle embers may not have been wasting attention. That child could have been downloading a survival library. Now the hypothesis faces a harder test. If fascination is partly a learning drive, fascination should weaken after the skill is learned. The notification should disappear when installation is complete. Archaeology can tell us that fire was work. It cannot tell us whether curiosity switched off after competence. For that, we need living childhoods. Fessler sent questionnaires to 18 researchers with field experience and gathered information about 19 cultures in which fire remained an ordinary tool of daily life. This was not a controlled developmental study. It relied on ethnographers' recollections, and Fessler himself treated the material as preliminary. So keep the scientific brakes on. We are looking at a suggestive pattern, not a verdict engraved into the genome. The pattern is still striking. Children were reported to begin interacting with fire anywhere from toddlerhood to around age 6. Focusing on whichever gender reached proficiency earlier in each society, reported competence in maintaining a fire ranged from about 5 to 8 years old, averaging roughly 6.5. And in most of these societies, fire had little or no recreational role. Simply sitting and gazing at flames for entertainment was generally uncommon among both children and adults. Fessler's admittedly unsystematic observations in Bengkulu, Sumatra, give the hypothesis an especially neat narrative shape. There, Fessler reported that children began manipulating fire on their own at around 4. Interest in children's fires peaked around 6 or 7, then declined rapidly, disappearing before about 10. Children were often competent around 7. Once they knew how fire worked, fire became ordinary. Installation complete. Notification dismissed. The Hadza data point in the same direction. Children were reported to carry embers for practical purposes from around 3 or 4 and to create or maintain fires around 6. The ethnographic informant reported no play fires. Again, this does not prove an evolved fire learning adaptation. Culture, supervision, work, and ecology differ. But it does damage the simplest story that humans universally love, looking at fire, because fire itself is inherently entertaining. The people who still need fire may have the least reason to romanticize it. That is wonderfully backwards. We, the people who barely need open flame at all, are the ones buying scented candles called Mountain Hearth, installing decorative fireplaces under televisions, and driving to campsites so we can pay money to sit beside a technology our ancestors may once have guarded like a living power plant. This is where the prehistoric story turns into a modern glitch. This is the evolutionary mismatch Fessler's hypothesis proposes. In a fire-dependent environment, curiosity could eventually meet practice. The child watches, tries, learns, becomes competent, and the attentional system, if Fessler is right, has done its job. In a modern apartment, the curiosity can still arrive, but the curriculum has been removed. Flames are hidden behind safety systems. Heating comes from HVAC, light from LEDs, cooking from induction, and ignition is reduced to a button or someone else's problem. For extremely good reasons, we tell the child, do not touch. But if the ancient learning machinery exists, do not touch is not the same thing as lesson completed. It is closer to closing the laptop halfway through an update. 20 years later, the former child may sit in a climate-controlled room, under electric lighting, with dinner cooked by invisible currents, watching a video of logs burn on a screen. Our ancestors built civilization partly by domesticating fire. We then domesticated civilization so thoroughly that actual fire became optional. And apparently we missed it enough to invent a screensaver for the Paleolithic. There is one more clue worth adding. Fire-like audiovisual stimuli have also been associated with measurable physiological changes during viewing. Across 3 randomized crossover studies, anthropologist Christopher Dana Lynn examined 226 adults in total. Participants experienced conditions including silent fire video, fire with crackling sound, and control stimuli. In the third study, which analyzed 60 participants and extended the viewing conditions to 15 minutes, the fire with sound condition showed the largest pre-to-post decrease. Systolic pressure fell by an average of about 5.9 millimeters of mercury, and diastolic by about 3.0. But there is a catch. Baseline blood pressure in the fire with sound condition happened to be significantly higher, even with randomized ordering. That makes the exact size of the effect uncertain. The study does not prove that fire lowers everyone's blood pressure by 6 points, and it certainly does not prove Fessler's evolutionary hypothesis. Still, the sensory detail is interesting. Silent flickering alone did not produce the same consistent pattern. Image plus sound did better. That gives us a useful metaphor, as long as we remember it is only a metaphor. Perhaps the modern fireplace is an emulator for old sensory software. The ancient input package was not a neat orange animation on a rectangle. It was moving light, crackling sound, warmth, smoke, social proximity, darkness pushed back at the edge of camp. Give the emulator more of the original signals, and perhaps the simulation feels more convincing. Civilization has uninstalled almost the entire functional fire package. We no longer need an open flame to keep predators away from the edge of camp. We do not preserve embers overnight, because losing them might mean waiting for nature to reboot the system. We do not need children to graduate from practical fire management at 6 or 7 in order for the household to function. But evolution is not an app store. It does not push a clean patch every time we renovate the house. Culture can replace the building long before genetic evolution updates the wiring. And if a fire-specific learning bias really exists, old software could keep running on new hardware. And this is why the unfinished lesson hypothesis is so emotionally satisfying, even while remaining scientifically unproven. It turns our fascination with flame from a quaint preference into a small piece of evolutionary archaeology inside the mind. Look again at the people sitting around the fire. The flame is not cooking their dinner. It is not saving them from winter. It is not keeping a leopard outside the light. Nobody must stay awake to protect the embers until morning. The fire has been demoted from infrastructure to decoration. And perhaps that is exactly why the scene is so strange. For most of our history, mastering nature did not mean being born with answers. It meant having a mind that refused to leave certain problems alone. Faces, language, social rules, danger. Maybe fire belonged on that list too. Not as a preloaded manual, but as a flashing folder marked, "Open this, it matters." There is something deeply human in that arrangement. Curiosity is expensive. It gets fingers dirty, knees bruised, parents exhausted, and occasionally produces inventions that require warning labels. But curiosity is also how a vulnerable primate turns a hazard into a tool. Fire captures that bargain perfectly. Stay too far away and you lose its benefits. Move too close, and it punishes you. Learn the boundary, and danger becomes tool. Tool becomes infrastructure. Infrastructure becomes civilization. Then civilization changes the assignment. The modern child sees the same ancient phenomenon, but the practical course has mostly vanished. The heating works. The lights work. Dinner comes from an appliance. The lighter sits in a drawer they cannot open. The curiosity may still knock. Nobody needs to let it finish the class. So later, we recreate the missing classroom. We light candles at dinner. We build bonfires at celebrations. We put gas flames behind glass in hotel lobbies. We sit beside fire pits with people we like and become oddly content doing almost nothing. Sometimes we do not even need the heat. We just want the movement, the crackle, the little impossible object that is always becoming itself and disappearing at the same time. There may be many reasons this feels good. Fire can be socially soothing. Its sensory rhythms may hold attention without demanding much. Warmth, memory, culture, and learned association can all matter. Human behavior rarely gives us one clean explanation, but Fessler's hypothesis adds one extraordinary possibility. Maybe part of the attraction is unfinished business. Maybe fascination is what a learning system feels like before competence closes the loop. Maybe communities that teach fire early let that loop close, while modern life often keeps the hazard and removes the apprenticeship. We inherited the notification. Then we deleted the tutorial. Our ancestors were not born knowing how to command fire. They had to watch it, test it, feed it, fear it at the correct distance, learn what it consumed and what it gave back. Across immense stretches of time, a dangerous event in the landscape became something carried, maintained, controlled, and eventually created on demand. We built civilization around the success of that lesson. Then we built the lesson out of everyday life. And if Fessler is right, civilization finished the lesson of fire. Evolution never dismissed the class. Subscribe to Oddplain for more strange stories hiding beneath everyday life.